All right, diving in today. We're talking divine connection, like really feeling it, not just the idea of it.
And to get us there, we've got the Inner Bonding Workbook by Dr. Margaret Paul.
Now, she's been a psychotherapist for, over 17 years? And this inner bonding thing, she's been developing that even longer.
Over 3 decades. But the thing is, she wasn't raised in any kind of religious environment.
So, not coming at this from dogma or anything.
Yeah.
But she still felt this pull towards the divine. Just didn't know the how-to at first.
And it's that struggle that led her to what she calls the 2 secrets to actually achieving that connection.
2 secrets, huh? Now you've got me intrigued.
Ready for this. It boils down to the food we eat and the thoughts we think.
Okay, gotta admit, that's not where I expected us to start.
Yeah.
Food and thoughts, like what's the connection there?
Well, Dr. Paul makes this comparison to junk food, junk thoughts.
Junk food? Okay, I kind of get it. But how are thoughts junk?
Think of it like this. They both lower our frequency, that energetic state that makes spiritual connection difficult.
Frequency. Hold up, now I'm picturing radio dials. Not quite sure I'm tuned in right here.
Think of it like we can't see radio waves, but they're carrying music, conversations, all sorts of things. Our energy, our frequency, it's kind of like that.
It's there, even if we can't see it, and it's messing with my reception.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm with you on the junk food analogy. Processed stuff, sugar, that's going to mess with anyone's system.
Yeah.
But how do thoughts do that?
Dr. Paul gives the example of like self-judgment, constantly putting ourselves down. That's like static on the line to the divine,
Ah, okay. So it's not just about being super positive all the time. It's deeper than that.
Way deeper. It's about recognizing those thoughts as signals, not just letting them run wild. Look, everyone has negative thoughts. It's what we do with them that matters.
All right, so I'm trying to eat cleaner, be mindful. What's next on this divine connection path?
This is where it gets interesting. Dr. Paul gets into what she calls the 2 types of pain.
2 types. All right, hit me with it.
You've got wounded pain, which comes from how we treat ourselves. And then you've got existential pain, which comes from things that happen to us.
Okay, I can see how mixing those up would cause problems, but give me an example to make sure I'm getting this straight.
Let's say someone yells at you. Unfairly, right? The hurt from that bad treatment, that's existential pain. It happened to you.
Makes sense.
But then if you spiral and you're like, I'm always messing up. No wonder they yelled.
Oh, I do that.
That's wounded pain, right? It's self-inflicted on top of the original hurt.
Oof, yeah. So like Eliza, that mom Dr. Paul talks about, she felt this sense of dread and ended up saving her daughter from a dangerous situation.
Exactly. That dread wasn't just worry, it was intuitive knowing. She tuned into the right pain, the one guiding her, and acted on it.
But this other guy, the one who was suicidal despite all his spiritual practice, he was missing this distinction.
He was so focused on transcending emotions, he ignored the very real pain he needed to address. We can't just bypass those feelings. They're trying to tell us something.
So how do I know if it's my wounded self talking or if I'm genuinely being mistreated?
That's the heart of it, right? Inner bonding is about asking, is this pain from me abandoning myself somehow, or is something truly wrong outside of me?
Okay, that's step 1. So once I figure out what kind of pain I'm dealing with, then what?
Then comes the intent to learn. Dr. Paul is big on this. It's about consciously choosing to learn about loving ourselves rather than trying to control others.
So less, how do I make them stop yelling? And more, what is this pain teaching me about what I need?
Exactly. Total shift in mindset. You might have ways of shutting down feelings too,
Oh, for sure.
Like Cindy, this woman Dr. Paul talks about, learned to shut down her emotions as a kid to cope with her family. Inner bonding is about recognizing those patterns so they don't block that connection.
Think about a recent argument you had.
Yeah.
Was your goal to win or to understand? That reveals your intent, and that's how you start shifting it.
And when our intent is to learn about loving ourselves, that's how we invite that divine love, that compassion into our own hearts.
It's like, we're often so much better at offering that to others, right? Dr. Paul uses that analogy of how we'd approach an upset child. We wouldn't yell or blame.
Right. We try to understand, to comfort. We need more of that with ourselves sometimes.
Definitely. But this all sounds a lot easier than it is, right? Especially when we're talking about something like anger. We're often told to express it, to let it out. But Dr. Paul has a different take.
Yeah, she calls it blaming anger, and it's a huge roadblock on this path. When we're stuck in blame, we're cut off. That's where that divine guidance becomes crucial. It's like we're trying to force the other person to change instead of asking, what's my part in this? What can I learn?
Instead of looking inward, yeah.
Exactly. And that's where the divine guidance comes in, like having this inner compass, but we need to clear the interference to actually hear it. Dr. Paul really emphasizes that everyone can tap into this. It's not about religion or anything like that.
Okay, good, because for a second there, I was thinking I needed to sign up for some crazy meditation retreat.
It's less about the how, more about the intention. Are you open to receiving guidance? Are you willing to listen? That's what matters.
So I'm ready to listen. What's the next step then? How do I actually connect with this divine guidance?
Well, there are lots of paths, but there's this visualization Dr. Paul talks about that might resonate with you. Imagine you're in this peaceful place in nature. Really picture it. Maybe a field of wildflowers or a quiet forest or a beach with the waves gently rolling in.
I can picture it. I'm feeling more relaxed already. What's next?
Now picture your inner child sitting beside you. How old are they? What are they wearing? What's their energy like?
I see a little me, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing my favorite overalls and a bright yellow t-shirt. And there's this mix of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. Like they're not sure what to expect, but they're open to it.
Now picture your loving adult self reaching out to that child, extending a hand, inviting them to come closer, radiating warmth, compassion, that unconditional love.
It feels so natural to want to reach out and comfort them, like all the love I've ever wished for is pouring out from me.
Now hold that child in your arms, embrace them tightly, and let them know that you're there for them, that you'll protect them, that you'll never abandon them.
It's like this wave of peace washes over them as they snuggle into my embrace. There's this deep sense of belonging, of being truly seen and loved.
This visualization beautifully illustrates that dynamic between our loving adult self and our inner child, right? That loving adult is the part of us that can offer that unconditional love and support to those wounded parts of ourselves that are longing for healing.
It's like we're our own best parent, offering ourselves that nurturing and guidance that we may not have received in childhood.
Exactly. And this is truly the foundation for connecting with divine guidance. When we create that safe and loving space within ourselves, we open up that channel for that higher wisdom to flow through.
It's like we're clearing the static, tuning into that frequency where we can hear the whispers of our soul and the guidance of the universe.
And here's where those 2 secrets we talked about earlier become so crucial. The healthy eating and those positive thoughts. They're not just random tips. They're about creating that right internal environment for this connection to flourish.
Okay, let's talk food first. We touched on gut health earlier, but Dr. Paul really dives deeper into this, right? It goes beyond eat your vegetables.
She brings up gut dysbiosis, which is basically an imbalance of bacteria in our gut. Turns out this can actually lower our frequency, make it harder to access our intuition, that guidance we're talking about.
You mentioned earlier that 80% of our immune system is linked to our gut. What kind of research backs that up?
Oh, tons. There's a growing body of research showing how crucial gut health is for everything. Our physical health, mental, emotional state. It's all connected. Dr. Paul cites studies showing gut dysbiosis can contribute to anxiety, depression, even brain fog.
Wow. So it's not just about physical health, it's impacting our spiritual well-being too. It's like our gut is our second brain or something.
Right. And to make things even trickier, modern food production, it's lowered the frequency of our food itself.
Hold on. So it's not just what we eat, but how that food was grown and treated that affects its energy. That's wild.
It is. Factory farming, all those antibiotics they use, GMOs, it all adds up. Dr. Paul even suggests if you're really struggling to look into functional medicine. It addresses root causes of illness, not just treating symptoms.
Okay, definitely getting the message about food. What about the thought side of things? What kind of practices does Dr. Paul recommend for a more positive mindset?
Gratitude is huge. Taking time to appreciate the good things, no matter how small, it shifts things. She also talks about focusing on our strengths instead of dwelling on those weaknesses we all have.
Reminds me of when I cut out sugar for a month. Even my dreams were more vivid. It was like my whole system, mental and physical, was just clearer.
Exactly. It's about creating that inner environment where positivity can flourish. And when those negative thoughts creep in, which they will, it's about challenging them.
Instead of just letting them take over.
Right. Ask yourself, is this thought even true? Is it serving me? What's a more empowering way to think about this?
We're taking back control of our own minds, choosing thoughts that uplift us rather than drag us down.
Precisely. And as we do that, that frequency, it rises. makes that connection with divine guidance so much easier.
Like we're clearing that channel for wisdom and inspiration to flow through.
Now, all this leads us to understanding our wounded self. Dr. Paul says this part of us is often programmed with fears, false beliefs, things that prevent us from experiencing that divine connection.
Okay, wounded self. Feels like heavy stuff. We've all got baggage, right? What's Dr. Paul's advice for dealing with this part of ourselves?
The key here is that wounded self, while it might cause us to act out or sabotage ourselves, it's ultimately trying to protect us, like a little kid who's been burned before, so now they're scared to trust.
A defense mechanism, but one that's outdated.
Right. And just like with that inner child visualization, we gotta approach our wounded self with compassion, try to understand it.
How do we actually do that, though? It's not like I can sit down for coffee with my wounded self and hash things out.
Well, in a way, you can. Dr. Paul provides all these questions to ask this part of yourself. Things like, what are you most afraid of? Or what happened that created this fear? How old were you when it first started?
So it's about digging deep, understanding where these fears and insecurities come from, and offering that wounded self some reassurance.
Exactly. And get this, Dr. Paul says there are different types of wounded selves, too. There's the authoritarian type.
Yeah.
All about rigid rules, self-criticism.
You're not good enough. You should be doing more. Oh yeah, I know that voice.
And then there's the permissive type, all about indulging in unhealthy behaviors, avoiding responsibility, numbing out.
It's like two sides of the same coin, both trying to protect us in their own messed up ways.
And by understanding these patterns, we can start to create a more harmonious relationship between our loving adult self and our wounded self.
Bringing those two different parts of ourselves together.
And as we heal those old wounds and shed those limiting beliefs, we start to see our true selves, the beautiful, radiant beings we were always meant to be.
This reminds me of Kristen's story, the woman Dr. Paul talks about. She learned to embrace her sensitivity and quiet nature, even though everyone in her family was an extrovert.
Right. It's like she finally saw herself through the eyes of divine love and recognized her own worth.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so we're cleaning up those junk thoughts, figuring out the different types of pain, taking care of our inner child, working with our wounded self, all to get to divine connection. It's a lot.
It is, but the journey itself is transformative. And Dr. Paul gives us a very specific process for having a dialogue with our inner child and that wounded self. She calls it inner bonding. It's more than just journaling. It's actually a structured approach to inner healing.
So we're not just passively reflecting, we're actively engaging with these parts of ourselves.
Exactly. She walks us through the steps. Identifying those painful feelings and behaviors, understanding the needs and beliefs underneath them, and then actually dialoguing with those younger parts of ourselves, offering compassion, understanding, support.
It's like we're having a heart-to-heart with ourselves.
Right. And as we do this, we heal those old wounds, we release those limiting beliefs, we start to experience more love, more joy, more connection in our lives.
And it's not just about our relationship with ourselves, is it? Dr. Paul talks about how this work impacts our relationships with others too.
Absolutely. She talks about Ellen, who completely transformed her relationship with her boyfriend by learning to love herself first.
Letting go of that need to control him.
Exactly. And Dr. Paul dives into different relationship patterns too, like the caretaker-taker dynamic or that anger-blame dynamic. These can really get in the way of those loving connections we all crave.
So recognizing those unhealthy patterns and choosing to create relationships that are based on mutual respect, support, understanding. That's key.
It is. And as we do this inner work, we become more aware of our own needs, our boundaries, and we can communicate them more clearly.
Setting ourselves up for those healthy, fulfilling relationships. What about that desire we all have, that yearning to express our unique gifts and make a difference? Dr. Paul talks about passionate purpose, right?
Yes. It's like this inner calling, this yearning to make a meaningful contribution. And what's fascinating is, she says that blueprint for our passionate purpose can get buried during childhood.
Like a treasure map, just waiting to be unearthed.
She argues that inner bonding helps us uncover it. By healing those old wounds, freeing ourselves from those limiting beliefs that have been holding us back, we reclaim our power and step into our full potential.
She even shares the story of Glenn, who went from this successful but totally unfulfilling career as an attorney to becoming a college professor. Talk about a transformation.
Exactly. And she gives some really practical tips for exploring our passions, too. She says, think back to those past dreams you had, those things you enjoyed doing as a kid. What were your favorite books, subjects? What lights you up, brings you joy, a sense of fulfillment?
It's about paying attention to those inner nudges.
Yeah.
Right? Those sparks of excitement.
And what about when we know what we need to do, but we just can't seem to get ourselves to do it. That whole taking loving action thing. What does that actually look like in real life?
It really is about bridging that gap between what we know and what we actually do.
Easier said than done sometimes, right?
For sure. Dr. Paul, she's really open about her own struggles too. She talks about how she overcame this addiction to caretaking, learning to prioritize her own needs first.
And it wasn't easy at first, I bet.
Not at all. But eventually it led to better health for her, more joy, freedom. It's like taking loving action. Even when it's tough, it's an investment in our future selves.
But what about those times when we know what's good for us, but we just can't seem to make ourselves do it? What do we do then? Well, Dr. Paul encourages us to really get curious about that resistance. What are the fears, the false beliefs holding us back? Like, what's the worst that could happen if we actually took care of ourselves?
Yeah, we often build those fears up in our minds way bigger than they actually are.
Exactly. She also talks about those inner conflicts that can lead to procrastination, like the controller and the resistor parts of our wounded selves.
So it's not just laziness or lack of willpower. There's actually this internal battle going on.
Right. The controller wants to be in charge, make all the decisions, while the resistor digs in its heels and says, nope, not going to do it.
It's like having those two little devils sitting on our shoulders, whispering in our ears.
And you know what often comes up? That fear of being selfish. So many of us were raised to put others' needs before our own.
Yeah, that's a big one. How does Dr. Paul address that?
She straight up debunks that belief. She says true selfishness actually comes from neglecting our own needs, our well-being. Taking care of ourselves allows us to show up better for others.
It's like that oxygen mask on the airplane analogy. You got to put yours on first before you can help anyone else.
Exactly. Dr. Paul even tells the story about a woman named Barbara, who finally learned to set healthy boundaries with a friend, and guess what? Their relationship actually improved because she was no longer abandoning herself.
Powerful stuff. So how do we start putting all this into practice? It feels a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
Dr. Paul, she breaks it down for us. She gives specific examples of loving actions in all these different areas of life: emotional, physical, financial, relationships, how we organize our lives, even our spiritual practices.
It's like a blueprint for creating a life that truly nourishes us on all levels.
But she's also realistic. She knows we can't tackle everything at once. So she encourages us to choose just one or two actions to start with. Small steps, celebrating the progress along the way.
Makes it feel less daunting, right? Like, okay, I can do this one small thing today.
And then tomorrow, you can do another small thing. It all adds up.
But how do we know if we're on the right track? If those actions are actually loving and supportive, not just another form of self-sabotage.
Dr. Paul says, pay attention to how you feel after taking a loving action. Do you feel lighter, more peaceful, more joyful? Or do you feel drained, resentful, like you've just added another item to your to-do list?
It's like checking in with our inner compass, trusting our intuition to guide us.
Exactly. And remember, even though some loving actions might feel difficult in the short term, like quitting an addiction or setting a boundary with someone you care about, they're ultimately leading you towards greater well-being and fulfillment.
It's like that saying, short-term pain for long-term gain. Sometimes we need to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone to grow.
And you don't have to do this alone. Dr. Paul encourages us to seek support from our higher power, from therapists, healers, those trusted people in our lives who can hold space for us as we do this work.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders, reminding us of our worth and our capacity to heal.
And in the end, that's what inner bonding is all about. Creating a way of life that fosters that loving relationship with ourselves, which then opens us up to deeper connection with the divine and with others.
This has been such a profound deep dive. It's clear that Dr. Paul's work is a true gift, offering a path to healing and wholeness that's available to anyone who's willing to do the work.
I agree. Her teachings are empowering and inspiring. A reminder that we all have that power within us to create a life filled with love, joy, and meaning.
To our listeners, we encourage you to dive into the Inner Bonding Workbook yourselves. Explore these concepts, experiment with the practices that resonate with you, and trust that you're being guided every step of the way. Until next time, may your lives be filled with love, peace, and divine connection.